When you are working with patrons in your museums who have varying degrees of vision, from low vision to none, how do you incorporate the five senses into the discussions that you are having about pieces of art? And if you wanted to get really specific, how would you go about using the five senses to describe something as elemental as a specific color in a piece of art?
Okay, using all the five senses. First, I would say that using all the five senses is something that we try to do increasingly with all audiences, because everybody can benefit from using all of their senses to engage with a work of art. For example, though using touch is very different if you're someone who is sighted and not used to exploring an object through touch, or you're partially sighted, or somebody who is blind, has been blind from birth, uses Braille, and is much more accustomed to doing that. So part of our strategy would be to adjust the level of guidance needed. And I'd also say that using the five senses, although it's really important and very valuable as a strategy to engage with works of art, you can go overboard, and you have to be very judicious and thoughtful about why you're offering a scent or a sound to help someone understand a work of art, and have a goal in mind, have a reason for that. With regard to color, I think, and Pamela and I were just talking about this a little while ago, how even if you don't have an aesthetic appreciation, an aesthetic experience of color as somebody without visual memory, you will have some sort of linguistic or intellectual association. So we might think of red as hot, or blue is a cool color. And so you can use those metaphors, which Pamela and Deborah do a great deal in their teaching, to talk about the different qualities of color that are not necessarily visual.
The texture of people know, for example, that grass in the springtime is green, and so they might, if they haven't seen green, they might associate the feel of grass and the smell of grass with the color green. So it's nice to evoke sensory associations when referring to color that is a common shared experience.
And I think the same would also go with if you're accustomed to eating an orange, and you can relate that back to some kind of reference to orange. But I also wanted to mention in our drawing class, we actually used as a source work of art something called Narva. It's a kinetic sculpture, and we were able to hear it. And for those who could experience visually what was going on, it was moving continuously. And then to engage a tactile sensory experience, Pamela and I always have our drawing students touch and handle their paper and make understand the differences, how different papers feel, and then also handling the drawing material. So that almost gets all the senses together. I don't think we had smell in there really, but it does bring all the senses out.
One of the things that we have found in doing our tours at the Whitney is that we usually create replicas, touch objects for almost all the works most of the works that we're talking about. And we brought those here today, but we also have discovered that using those touch objects with all of our audiences has been really amazing. So, using touch, using the five senses across the board can get all of our visitors to the museum an experience with a work of art that nobody can have, because in general we're not allowed to touch works of art in the museum. So we're really grateful that these programs have kind of given us that insight into how exploring works of art through touch can help anyone. And one of the things, to add on to what you were all saying about color, one of the tricks that we do is to use really specific terms, because this whole idea that every color does have an association and that everyone does have a very specific idea, be it a metaphor or something that it could remind them of. So usually when we're talking about color with a group, we'll have everyone in the audience go around and say one association that you might have with a specific color. And artists have chosen these colors, of course, for not only their visual representations, but also for their metaphorical connotations also. So if we're talking about red, some people associate red with love, some people with anger, some people with fire hydrants. And to have all of those associations come out in the discussion can really open doors into how and why the artist might have chosen to use those colors.
And just to add on, actually, to all of that, the Guggenheim, one of the things I think that we do specifically as our exhibitions change every 3 months, so we're going from painting shows to interactive shows to sculpture shows. It's always changing. One of the things that I think we really use is we look to the artist and we look to their writings, if there are that, or interviews that they've had, thinking about the associations they make with color or they make when they're creating a work of art, and then using those within our descriptions. And even if we end up crafting a touch object or introducing multi-sensory experiences in the galleries, that they're specific to the artist's process, and so that it's another layer of learning and understanding the choices that an artist makes when they're making a work of art, and perhaps why kind of get into the process with the artist.